views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
This show's audio was via a Skype call.
Get fired up for Spirit Fire Radio with your hosts, Dorothy, Riddle, and Steve Kramer. Get ready to shine the light on universal spiritual principles and uncover ways that ageless wisdom can guide you in cultivating consciousness in these modern times. Bring purpose to your life through practical spirituality and add to your awareness with Spirit Fire Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Dorothy, Riddle, and Steve Kramer.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Spirit Fire Radio. My name is Steve Kramer. It's a delight to be with you and a delight to be with my co-host, Dr. Dorothy Riddle. Hi, Dorothy.
Hi, Steve. Glad to be here.
Indeed. So, Dorothy, we're going to continue our conversation on participation. It's been such an interesting month. We are on week number 4 of participation, and we're going to be talking today about making our actions. So we talked about how thoughts lead to words, words usually lead to an activity. And so how do we participate? How do our actions create our own reality? A pretty big topic. Dorothy, do you have a quote for us today?
Yeah, I actually have 2, Steve.
Nice.
The first is from Harriet Tubman. Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. So that's how our actions can play out. And then the other quote is, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing.
Yes, indeed.
And that, to me, is a really important one. And, Steve, there are so many ways we can talk about this, but I think one of the most basic issues for us in terms of what shapes our actions that then shape our reality is who we choose for role models. We may not be aware that we use role models, but we do, in fact, select people that we look up to, and then we try to conform to what they would do or what we think they would appreciate or agree to. And so that whole process of watching others is really critical. It's how we see what the options are that we could do. It is part of what shapes our moral compass, which we've talked about a lot last year. And it emphasizes, what's important in terms of values, like some cultures talking about the impact of 7 generations as opposed to just what's happening today.
Well, I also think that it's important that we make an effort to allow role models to be to share our role models, to talk about it, to bring them out into the open. I find that especially in this day and age where it seems to be we're so opinionated, it seems to be we're so critical of one another, this idea of sort of really dramatic news stories and a lot of it having a negative bend. We seem to be missing role models. I wish there was more conversation about the people who are doing right than the people who are doing wrong. I find especially if you look into the Me Too movement, and sexual harassment and so many examples of the negative, of ways in which men have certainly acted in a way that has created harm. And yet we don't seem to have a balance of presenting male role models who have set the example, who are doing right. So I think it's important that it's not only that we learn appropriate behaviors by watching others, we also can learn inappropriate behaviors, and we need to balance that which we're paying attention to, So we keep these positive role models, examples of them, in the forefront of our minds and in conversation and in celebration, as opposed to just always sort of feeling contracted and critical about those that are doing wrong, but really celebrating those who have done right. And what are their qualities? How can we emulate their qualities? It seems important.
Yeah. Well, if referring to the Me Too movement, which I think is a really important initiative that has started. I'm one of the millions and millions and millions of women that have experienced sexual abuse and sexual harassment. There are very few women I know that haven't. And so to build on what you're saying, Steve, we need role models not only for men to see what's possible as alternate behavior, but also for women to recognize what they don't have to put up with. That it is possible to have a different type of relationship rather than an abusive relationship.
Yes. It would be nice to see, along with, so many incredible women coming forward and setting an example, becoming role models. It would be so lovely to see the same happening with the men who stand up and say, hey, this is the right way to act, and this is how I have called out those who are, who are not acting appropriately. We've got a retreat coming up here at Spirit Fire with Zakiah Blackburn, who's a really interesting sound healer. And it is all about the sacred male. And I just did a little interview with him to promote the retreat, and he was saying just the same thing. He was saying, we talk so much within spiritual circles about the sacred female, and we often don't talk about the sacred male. So much of what is going on is not the result. It is the result of a lack of understanding and a lack of example, a lack of sort of aligning oneself as a male with males who are doing right. That we need to bring that forward as well to set the example, because it's really missing. It's really a male problem. This Me Too movement
right.
is a male problem. So
well, I'm reminded of years ago when I moved to Arizona. I met a group of men who were working with men in the jail system or prison system who were there because of domestic violence charges. And I'll never forget, talking with one of them about why they were doing the work that they were doing. And they said something, quite parallel to what you were saying. They said domestic violence is a male issue, and men need to be addressing it with other men. And that's why we go and we work with them on how to be a compassionate human being. And I was just really struck by that. And I must say, I think, there are parallels in other situations where instead of expecting the victim to help the oppressor, that the oppressors need to work with each other to stop being oppressors.
Yes. He asked me to name some role models of my own, and right away I named 3 women, and he said, "See," he said, "Really, in a lot of spiritual circles, when you ask that question, a lot of people, you'll rarely find men. I don't know if that's just happenstance, but it was interesting. We got a good laugh at it. Anyway, so it's important to choose. It's important to choose your role models wisely and find values, that are meaningful to you. I was just reading a little piece by Charlene Hunter Galt. She's a journalist and she's a correspondent for NPR, and she met Martin Luther King, and she was talking about meeting him for the first time. And she said, as I started to introduce myself, before I could get past my name, he reached for my hand, energetically shaking it while telling me he was proud of me, saying, "You're doing such a good job. You're doing a magnificent job down there." She was enrolled in an all-white university with another African-American students. And he told her, that education was key to their freedom. Then he generously thanked me, she says, and wished me success. And she said, before I could tell him how proud of him I was, he was mobbed by other admirers. She says what she will always take from that moment and what he taught her was one of his core values, which was humility. That he allowed her to come first. So, so important to find these values that are meaningful to us, and interesting that in such a powerful presence, right, in a role model like a Martin Luther King Jr., or that he would put her first, that it was humility that came forward. Quite lovely.
Well, for me, one of my first role models that stood out was the Dalai Lama, because I met him when I was a senior in high school. He came in when he fled Tibet. He came into exile near the school that I was going to in northern India before the Tibetan community moved to Dharamsala. And he came to speak at our school. And his energy, I will never forget it. The first time I was aware of energy fields, his aura, his energy field was huge. I mean, it was like if you put your arms out to the side, it was even bigger than that. And in India, there was a practice called doing darshan, and several of us would walk through the mountains to where he was staying, every couple of months, and you would simply walk past him and just experience that energy field. And the way that he spoke about what was going on in Tibet and the impact on his life and why he needed to make the decision to leave has stayed with me all these years. And it was, he embodied for me compassion and kindness and traits that sometimes, Steve, I don't understand it, but sometimes those are seen as weak traits.
Yes.
The bully is seen as the strong person. I don't understand that dynamic, because to me, that quiet strength and dignity is much more powerful in its impact on our shared energetic space.
Well, there's that saying of don't listen what they say, but watch what they do. And I hear that in the reflection on Martin Luther King Jr. and in your story on in your reflection on the Dalai Lama, was that it was his presence. It was really watching the way he held himself and watching his response to others that really was meaningful to you. I find sometimes with bullies, it's their harsh speech, and that this rudeness that just gets your attention, and then you're hooked, and it becomes a power play. It's really about the personality of a me. Is it about me or is it about the other? Which comes back to that Martin Luther King, which is just simply thanking someone and moving on, and that being what really speaking about your true nature. And it's the bully that just gets everybody's attention, gets them all worked up, and has them just waiting for what's next because it's drama. Somehow we're just all attracted to drama. And I think of Obama, who was one of those who governed, I felt, very silently and gently. And as you say, he was quite mistaken as weak, called weak often, but I think will have quite the lasting impact. Mm-hmm. Dorothy, we're already at our first break. So,
my goodness. Okay.
Yes. Listeners, we will continue this conversation after these words.
Hi, I'm Barbara Scheidegger, clinical hypnotherapist and founder of Swiss Hypnotherapy. And this is a tip with purpose. Being wrong or making mistakes is human. What have you learned from it? Start laughing about the silly things you did. Yeah, laugh about it. Being happy is more important than being always right. Start listening to your feedback. Be willing to redefine yourself every day. Communication with yourself and others who already are successful in their lives. Stay balanced. And when you fall off the wagon, don't dwell on it. Just hop back on. Forgive yourself. Admit what you did. Move on and smile. I hope this tip helps you. You can reach me at 323-999-4775 or at my website at swisshypnotherapy.com.
Please join us for a transformational conference with 5 of the leading pioneers in the fields of science and spirituality, all in one place. Join best-selling authors and teachers Greg Braden, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Lynn McTaggart, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and Lee Carroll in both individual workshops as well as a weekend of keynote presentations and panel discussions. At this extraordinary event, you'll get to experience some of the brightest leaders of our world today, empowering you with groundbreaking new information, deep wisdom, and practical tools to transform your life. Come connect with others and expand your consciousness in beautiful Nanaimo on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, June 14th through 19th. For more information or to register for what some are expecting to be one of the best conferences of 2018, visit shalohaproductions.com. That's SHALOHA Productions.com. Or visit the individual speakers' websites.
Conscious Confidence Radio, a timeless wisdom with Sarah Main. Tune in each month on Transformation Talk Radio and join Sarah on an adventurous journey to the deeper level of meaning to move beyond today's world of constant change, confusion, and uncertainty beyond the shadow of fear. This hit show explores key concepts such as confidence, values, and attitude in a dynamic way. To learn more about Sarah and her work, visit sarahmain.com.
Stay juicy. Tune in to Your Juicy Love with me, Una Drake, co-hosting monthly with Dr. Pat, and every second Monday at 12 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio. My show, Your Juicy Love, helps you find the dynamic, life-affirming love you've always wanted. Transform your relationships and bring peace, joy, and juicy, juicy love to planet Earth. For more information, visit unadrake.com.
Welcome back, listeners, to Spirit Fire Radio. Before we continue this conversation, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the organizations that both Dorothy and I participate in actively. I am here on behalf of Spirit Fire. We are an educational nonprofit, and our mission is to educate people on the importance of consciousness and spirituality in everyday life, to make that practical so that we can all feel in its effects and participate actively in being conscious, kind, and aware. We do that through online programming, through our own meditation practice called the Practice of Living Awareness. You can find out more about Spirit Fire and about our retreat center in Western Massachusetts, where we have meditation programs and all kinds of wonderful retreats. You can find out more about that at spiritfire.com. And Dorothy, the School for Esoteric Studies?
Yes, I am representing the School for Esoteric Studies, which is also an educational nonprofit. Our focus is on training people who already have a spiritual practice that they want to deepen, and we do that also through meditation, study, and service. And we have a particular initiative to reach out to like-minded organizations and enter into collaboration. And Spirit Fire Radio is one of those collaborations, which we're thrilled to have with Spirit Fire. You can find out more about us at esotericstudies.net. And please take a look at who we are and what we offer, either to you individually or to your organization as a potential collaboration partner. Again, that's esotericstudies.net.
Wonderful. And listeners, if you want to catch up on any archived radio programs, we've got a couple seasons under our belt, Dorothy. You can, listeners, yes. You can find our archives at spiritfireradio.com or obviously through Transformation Talk Radio. So, Dorothy, right before the break, we were talking about leadership a bit. We were talking about our actions and the way that they shape our reality. And we had mentioned bullies and harshness. We talked about that last week as well, harsh speech, and really the damage that can do. And it makes me think of a quote from the Tao, which I often think of Obama and the Tao. I often feel like he led through the wisdom of the Tao. It's the Tao Te Ching. And there's a quote, I believe it's from verse 44. Says, "Water is fluid, soft and yielding, but water will wear away rock, which is rigid and cannot yield. As a rule, whatever is fluid, soft, and yielding will overcome whatever is rigid and hard. This is another paradox. What is soft is strong." I love
that. Yeah.
And it makes me think of you have mentioned, Dorothy, quite a bit that this idea of survival of the fittest. We think of activity, and when we think of how we act, that in order to survive, we've got to be strong. We've got to be forceful is to survive. But really, it is survival of the most adaptable, right? That really survives. And
That's
so
right.
To be fluid and soft, to really learn how to move with the flow, go with the flow, is really the way. That's the way to create change.
That's right. And that gets at one of the myths that we'll be talking about, I think, in a couple of months, which is the myth that it's, that survival of the fittest is all about competition and who wins. Whereas, in fact, cooperation is the method through which we have survived and thrived, over the years. And I think, you gave a quote from the Tao. I'd like to give a quote which is probably fairly well known from Margaret Mead. And she says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has."
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
And I think that that's so important because it brings with it hope that, we may be few, but we can affect a change.
And that we need to cooperate. It really does come down, we've talked quite a bit about this idea of competitive versus cooperative, and we are all interconnected. We have established this, and it is that we have really got to learn to model actions that elicit cooperation. Thoughtful, committed citizens. To be thoughtful means that you have processed. You have made a commitment. And your mind is in the right place. You have committed yourself to change. And when we are in a place of competition, we are still in a place of me. It is about us, and it is about us versus them. And it seems that when we expand and include, that the cooperation is key.
Well, and also I think it's important to keep in mind that whatever we do, the action choices that we make, they lay the groundwork for the future. I mean, if you think about like dragging something along in the dirt and over again, and it digs a deeper and deeper furrow, the same thing is true of our actions. It creates a predisposition to act that way again. And oftentimes we're in a situation where we have to react quickly to a situation. We don't have the luxury of a couple of days to think about, what would be the best response. And so we will default to whatever we have had the most practice with. And that's why it's important that we ingrain within ourselves the action patterns that reflect how we want the world to be, how we want to be in the world, what our shared reality is. Because if we repeatedly avoid right action, avoid taking that risk of speaking up when something is not happening appropriately, then right action itself will start to feel wrong because it's unfamiliar. So we need to make what we want to materialize, that needs to become what feels familiar and what is easy.
and that actually acting on it is so important. It's taking that next step. It's one thing to think it, and we've talked about the very fact that you think about it is actually affecting the world, but there are instances where that's just not enough. We've really got to take action to create change. We had a really interesting group of people here at Spirit Fire just this last week, and they were committed to making the surface of the earth sustainable for agriculture for the next century. So they were really talking about global food sources, and there was somebody from Thailand, somebody from California, somebody from New York, and these were really big players actually in organic fertilizers and ways to really make sustainable farming in communities that are lacking that. But one thing they came up with that was so interesting, and I didn't know this. One of the women was saying that the migration patterns of the fish have been so thrown off lately. She was talking about the world being ours, to steward, and the state of the ocean. So fish migration patterns and the seasons in which they migrate have been thrown off, which means that the regulations are not in place anymore. So certain countries have regulations that say you can take this many fish from this area at this time. But now the fish have moved out of those areas that are regulated, and their migration patterns because of weather changes have changed the timing. So these regulations are out the window. And slowly these fishermen are realizing that they can set up shop on different shores at different times. They're outside of these regulations and just fish all they want. And she said it's such a scary thing that if all the major fisheries catch on, and nothing happens, if right action doesn't take place straight away, that we could really deplete to such a damaging level the marine life of the ocean in the next decade. She said it could even be 5 years, but she said in 10 years where it would absolutely affect the populations of fish in the world, which is just crazy. So it shows you that we've all got to be aware. And she says right now, politics are at a point where we're actually deregulating. We're letting go of regulations, and she says, no, it's just got to turn. So there's a time where we've all just got to be educated and take action, say, where is my fish coming from? Has this fish been fished responsibly? And you hope that the powers that be will actually act. So timing, it's so important, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing is, although it may be a bit unnerving, we are always acting. We tend to think that when we put forth a certain effort, that is an action, but not putting forth that effort is also an action, or the kind of inaction. And we see this particularly in talks about voting. If you vote, then that's seen as action, but actually choosing not to vote is also an action, and it has consequences.
Yeah, that idea of idle hands are the devil's workshop. If you don't vote, then, those who are voting are shaping your world for you. And so being aware and taking action is so important. So important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Dorothy, we're at another break. And listeners, we will be back after these words. We're going to talk about how do you act to turn the tide? What if action is flowing one way and you feel you need to act to oppose it? How do you do that with efficacy when we get back?
To find answers to life's questions, you need to look within yourself. Dr. Glenna Rice brings your questionable conversations on Transformation Talk Radio each month. Tune in each month for insight into how you can live up to your full potential. Dr. Glenna is a physical therapist, certified Access Consciousness, and Access Body Class Facilitator. How does it get any better than this? For more information on Dr. Glenna Rice and her work, visit glennarice.com.
Wow. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Dr. Pat Show. This is Talk Radio to Thrive By. I'm telling you, I got to pinch myself some days, because when each of us gets called to do something that we so not thought was in our wheelhouse to do, for a purpose that's so much greater than us, we get to show up and shine.
If you would like to show up and shine on the Dr. Pat Show as a co-host or sponsor, send us an email to inspire@thedrpatshow.com.
Love Living Radio Ignite Your Whole Being with Emily Perkins is a show for those looking to explore the sparkling magnificence of their inner selves. Tune in every second and fourth Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific as Emily sheds a radiant light of love on the beauty and power that resides within you. Discussing love in all its forms through conversations that provoke awareness, curiosity, and expansion, Emily shares the unlimited power of love. For more information or to listen to this show, visit lovelivingHolistics.com.
Practice living in wholeness with the body tune-up. 6 classes for $89 designed for radical self-healing and self-regeneration. Heal the deepest root of any challenge. The mental body was programmed in negativity, not good enough, separate from source. You're too much, you'll never make it. The emotional body holds all the pain and trauma of emotional suppression, all the pain from this life and life's past. The spiritual body is the place you connect with your higher power, your higher self, with the image and likeness of the One. The physical body houses and expresses the other 3 bodies every day. Go to CorneliaStephanie.com. Evolve, become a practitioner. We need to heal, integrate, and bring into wholeness and harmony the physical body, addressing all the other bodies in order to live in our true, authentic nature.
Living Lighter Radio with Jason and Patricia. We have an ecosystem approach to your life. Tune in weekly every Monday at 1 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio as we, Jason and Patricia, discuss what's truly holding you back. We offer you the tools you need to reach your goals and at the same time be living lighter. For more information about Living Lighter, visit www.livinglighter.org.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to Spirit Fire Radio. We're talking about our actions. Why do our actions matter? How do we participate through our activity? Well, Dorothy, we were just talking about the ocean, so acting against the tide. You know, it's often just so easy to go with the crowd. It's like, you know, the lemmings, right? We sort of just go with what others are doing, and sometimes it's not so wise. You know, we've really sometimes got to observe and ask ourselves, does this feel right? Is this aligned with the greater good? Is there harm in what's happening? There's safety in numbers, but maybe there's a time that we've got to act against the tide. So any thoughts on how one might go about that?
Well, I think that we can come at it from a couple of directions. One is, to me, it's really critical who we spend time with. And by that, I don't just mean that we only spend time with people that we are certain believe exactly the way we do, because we need to understand the complexities of situations in order to make an appropriate choice.
Yeah.
So having people that we spend time with, that we respect, but that have a different perspective from us is also very, very important. And then educating ourselves about, you know, what the options are for action, recognizing that we always have a responsibility in terms of our behavior, whether it is proactive, reactive, you know, or we think it's inactive. It all influences the energetic space that we share. So what are the possibilities? And are we someone who can create a new possibility for what will happen? I think that those are some of the things that we need to keep in mind in terms of acting responsibly.
I would love to talk just also a bit about this idea of protest. We mentioned that in the last show, we were talking about the fact that in America, the most populated I believe it was 4 of the 5 most populated protests have happened during the Trump administration in all of American history. So we really are protesting, but peaceful protest is so important. I know we sort of think that to act against the tide is to push back, to meet force with force, that I don't find that that's so effective. This idea of an extreme protest is more of the same. When I was in New York City in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a group called ACT UP, and they were acting up in response to the AIDS crisis and trying to get trials of medicine trials for AIDS patients readily available to get people participating in these trials, and it just wasn't happening fast enough. The gay community didn't feel that the government was talking about it or doing anything about it, and so there was a lot of protests that sometimes were really about civil disobedience, that there was a time for that, but also a time for peace. I find that it really matters that you are not fueling the opposition, that you're not creating more of the same. And I feel like when we're going up against the tide, we've really, the goal has got to be for us all to cooperate in the end and not to create more of this competition. So it's finding a way to create, to create a unification, a sense of togetherness, and just trying to find common ground. We've talked about that in the past, that if you can find something that you've got in common, to work toward, some kind of a better way, right, Dorothy?
Yeah, and I think we need to qualify this by saying that there are times for all kinds of activity, and civil disobedience has its important role to play. But there are also other kinds of activity. I'm thinking of maybe 5 or 7 years ago in the UK, there was a trial staged, with a judge and everything, and it was on environmental pollution, to try to shine a light on the impact of environmental pollution. And its target, the entity that it put on trial, was the CEO of the activities at the tar sands in Alberta, which is just, you can see from outer space the devastation that has been wrought there. It's just really distressing. And so they held this mock trial and brought up all the different sides of the issue, the economic, the environmental, all of that, as a way of publicizing what was going on. I think about another group, the Non-Human Rights Project in the United States, which is working to get recognition of sentient beings who are highly intelligent, very social. They meet all the criteria of personhood, certainly more so than corporations who are legally seen as persons, and trying to get them the right to control their own lives. So they have cases featuring several chimpanzees that are being held in captivity. Those cases have been making their ways through the courts in New York State. And then in Connecticut, they have cases involving 3 elephants that have been kept in captivity. Elephants are probably humans, cetaceans, like quails and dolphins, and elephants are probably the 3 most intelligent and most highly social species on the earth. And so they're trying to shine a light on those issues and, again, get freedom for the elephants, recognizing that it will take time to change the laws, but it has to be worked through the court system. So you have those kinds of activities, and then on the other hand, you have activities where you simply, use your body to say, no, we will not allow this to happen, to try to prevent actions that are irreversibly damaging. So there's a whole range, I think, Steve, of protest activity that is really important. But the common theme to me of it is a focus on the common good. This is not for me as an individual. This is for us as all of the beings on the earth.
Yeah, bringing awareness to everybody, and it does take time. It takes time and effort. I think of the very long process of SeaWorld, of the killer whales, of rights for the killer whales, and bringing an awareness, what it took to go against this tide. We all think of SeaWorld as being so much fun. We all have these memories of going to SeaWorld, and what it took, the documentary, what was it called, Dorothy? It's not coming to me all of a sudden, but documentary about SeaWorld and the killer whales and the energy it took, really, Blackfish. Yes. Thank you, Carter. The energy and the time it took to get people to sort of take a look at it from a distance and say, I have these really wonderful memories and a really good time at SeaWorld, but wow, this is really what's happening and that there is harm being done. And then to address that, and that it has been quite effective.
Well, and it's been interesting in the last little while, the dialogue or the discussion that has occurred about the use by the Trump administration of biblical passages to say, you have to obey the law. And those are the same biblical passages that were used to justify slavery, that owning other human beings was the law of the land at a particular time, and so you had to obey that, and you couldn't question it. Same thing was used to keep women and children treated as property rather than as intelligent beings in their own right. So it's challenging to know when you try to work within a common understanding of a legal structure and when you have to say, no, these no longer apply. We have matured beyond this, and we need to make a change.
Yes, indeed. And it really starts with our moral compass, right, Dorothy? We've mentioned it so many times.
That's right.
We have really got to establish that within ourselves, align our thoughts then become our belief system, and then find others that share that and bring about change. Dorothy, we're ready for another break, and we'll be back, listeners. I hope you join us after these words.
Are you your story? Or can you change your story? Can you change what you believe to be true about yourself and your circumstances as part of your healing journey? What if you were to change your expectations? What if you were to invite ease and cooperation into every day and then step back and see what happens? It might just be easier. I'm Megan Edge, and I hope that you'll join me on my new radio show, Playing on the Edge, Radical Change with Ease, with my co-host Dr. Pat on Transformation Talk Radio. I look forward to seeing you there.
Want to find out more about Megan Edge? Visit her website at meganedge.ca.
Hi, I'm Steve Kramer of Spirit Fire Radio, and I believe that meditation changes everything. It leads us in the direction of greater well-being, and that's a fact. I struggled with meditation for years. I understood the principles, but I found it hard to incorporate them into my everyday life. Spirit Fire's meditation practice changed that. It's called the Practice of Living Awareness, and it's taught in 14 steps. These are 14 tools that I can use in any moment, on and off the cushion. Steps like smile, flow, and ground of being support my clarity of mind while I'm navigating the ups and downs of modern life. That's why it's called the practice of living awareness. If you'd like to add meditation to your daily experience, the practice of living awareness is free, online, and it's suited for any level of practitioner. Visit spiritfire.com for more information. And be sure to check out Spirit Fire's meditation retreats in Western Massachusetts. It's all there at spiritfire.com.
Welcome back, listeners, and thank you for joining us for this discussion on managing our actions in terms of how we participate in creating our reality. We've talked about the need to make choices, that even not acting has consequences. So how is it that we decide what actions are best for us? And Steve, I'd like to introduce the concept of as if. And I think people may use this in different ways. But what I mean by this is that we can rehearse mentally or in our imagination different outcomes to see how it is that we really want to behave. So I can say, oh, okay, I have a choice I need to make, and I can see 3 or 4 different options that I could choose. So what I do is I take one of those options, and in my imagination, I act as if I have chosen that option. And then I see how that feels. So just on a very practical level, suppose my choice is whether or not to attend a particular event. So I might say, okay, I'm going to choose to go to the event. Now, let me imagine what that's going to be like. What are the positives? What are the challenges that I'm going to experience? And then after I've lived with that for a little bit, then I would say, okay, now what if I don't go to the event? How does that feel? What would that be like? What would the positives be? What would the negatives be? And then there might be a third option. Suppose I go only for the first half. What would that feel like? How would I do that? What if I chose, another option, a substitute activity during that same time period? So I think of as many different options as possible, and then I play them out in my mind. And that, first of all, it gives me practice in evaluating consequences. And secondly, it gives me a feel of what is likely to be the best choice for me. So I don't know if you do that, Steve, but I find that kind of rehearsal very, very helpful.
Yeah, and in a way I do. It is really about shaping your own reality. Like you are really participating, even on a quantum level, I would say. It's this idea of the law of attraction, in a sense, of it becoming probable by really imagining it and sensing how you feel. What I will do is if it starts to feel good, and I will then just create this enthusiasm around it, really, really enjoy that reality, and then move forward in that direction and allow that to unfold. Of course, you've got to stay flexible because, you can't have these expectations of it to be exactly the way you imagined, but more going on that feeling of, especially if it's an optimistic feeling of it being exciting and being fun and being new and being rewarding and being creative, then it's wonderful to sort of allow that to unfold. So it's almost as if you've helped sort of create it by using your mind, and then the participation with the universe at large is to just allow those cooperative components to come together and, in a sense, just watch it unfold. And I find that during that process is when you can sort of let go of these images that you had of how it would be, and it's as if the reality of it is just all the more. It's sort of like it's a bonus. It gets added to this sort of fun that you're having with and creating your reality. Indeed.
Well, I think that sometimes that's the way things play out. But sometimes the most appropriate choice is actually not something that's fun. And it's not something that's going to feel delightful. It may
Yes.
feel It may
I know where you're going with this.
It may feel like it's risky, and that it may be very painful, and that there may be consequences that are difficult. So, in order to be available to make that type of choice, if that is the best choice for you, to me that brings us back to the whole idea of the moral compass. We have to have something. We have to develop a strong sense within ourselves of what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what will result in the best for everyone, as opposed to just the selfish, this is what I'd like to do, and I don't care what happens to you. So,
well, Dorothy, just to interject, in those instances,
sure.
I'm feeling that what it is you are prepared, and that you are creating an alignment, like an inner alignment, and finding you're sensing your moral compass. Where does my moral compass lie, and how can that send me in the trajectory of my own personal truth? So that is similar to what I was saying before. Maybe it's not all about fun, but it is an adventure and an unfolding of truth and of that which is right and that which is meant to be. It's aligning yourself with your own truth, seeing that, knowing that is the way, and it's almost like pre-paving it, if you will, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to put in another related idea here, because I think, when we talk about our spiritual self, and that's part of what we're talking about on this program, we think about it's kind of a vertical alignment and a vertical expansion, that we get in touch with our soul, we get in touch with, however we describe that one life, the various levels, energetic levels of the one life to ourselves. But horizontal expansion is also important in terms of who we include in our decision making. So, to me, part of the as if imagining is practicing widening the circle of beings that I consider in terms of what the impact would be of my making that choice or taking that action. And it's not always easy, in that it can be very unfamiliar. In my own community, we have a practical example of this, where there is a contentious development project. There are a number of problems with this project, but one of the issues that has come out very clearly is that the developer, the faction that is focused on develop, considers only the economic rewards and the comfort of the people that will live in that particular development. They do not consider as being important the fact that part of this development is going to block a migration path for certain animals that live in our community, because we have we have bears, we have cougars, we have deer, we have these kinds of animals that coexist with us or try to coexist with us. So it's interesting to me who gets included in thinking about the impact of a particular action. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, right now, the World Cup, they built the stadium on what was one of in that area. It was very precious, nature preserve and lots of diversity, and splat, there goes the stadium. So yeah, we see that quite a bit. So we would hope that our leaders and those in positions of power to make these changes are widening that circle of widening when they ask the as if, are you really imagining everything and every being around you? Dorothy, we are at the end of our show. It's been a wonderful month talking about participation. Yeah?
Absolutely. And I really look forward to our next month. We're going to be talking about the principle of non-linearity. We're used to thinking of a linear past, present, and future, but in fact, our experience is fundamentally non-linear. That's what we know from the scientists. So we're going to talk about the implications of that.
Wow, that's going to be very exciting to go from the fact that we are all interrelated to, well, how do we participate in that, which seems linear in a way. Then we're just going to throw a curveball and say, well, it's actually not linear at all. Going to be fun, Dorothy. I look forward to it. And listeners, I hope you'll join us. Once again, if you'd like to listen to any archive shows, you can find that at spiritfireradio.com. Dorothy, I look forward to speaking with you next week. And thanks so much, listeners, for joining us on this show.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Fire Radio. Tune in each Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern for your weekly guide to purposeful living and practical spirituality. Join hosts Steve Kramer and Dorothy Riddle as they shine the light on universal spiritual principles and uncover ways that ageless wisdom can guide you in cultivating consciousness in your everyday life. Add to your awareness with Spirit Fire Radio. To learn more, visit spiritfireradio.com.